All right, this video is going to show you how to navigate your calculator, the TI Nspire CX with the CAS system, as well as do some basic functions that you'll need to use in class. So what we're looking at here is the home screen, okay? This right here is the way that you'll navigate the screen. So you can use the down arrow, the up arrow, left and right, but you can also use this as a mouse and just kind of like, yeah, you'll just kind of have to figure that out yourself. Okay, so this is the home button. Okay, so if you ever get lost, you go home, you just click the on button. On the home screen, we have the scratch pad and we have documents. Okay, we will not be using documents. We mostly will operate in the scratch pad feature. Down here, if I use my down arrows, you can see that we have, these are called applications. So you would use these applications in a new document. But again, we won't really need that. And if we do, I'll make sure I explain how to do that. So for the most part, we're just going to be using the scratch pad. But before we get to that, I want to make sure that we have our settings set up the way we want. Okay, so you can notice that there's an A and a B here, okay, and there's letters down here. So if I click on B, it's going to take me to the scratch pad graph. There are two things here. There is a calculator and a graph. And so I can click on this and that will take me to the calculator portion. We'll talk about that later. So let's go back home. So we're going to click number 5 because we want the settings feature. We want to make sure our settings are done correctly. So click on settings and then you're going to go to document settings and you're going to click on that. All right, so the display, this is what your screen should say. This is how it's set up in the beginning. Display digits, we can leave that at float 6. Radians, the angle, we want to change that to degree. That's really important. You want the angle to be at degree. Everything else should stay the same. You'll notice this calculation mode. There's auto and there's approximate. And so we're going to leave it on auto for now. And then we're going to say that we want to make this our default. So we're going to click on make default. And are we wanting to do this? Yes. Okay. All right. So our settings should be set up the way we want it. So now let's go to the scratch pad and see what we can do. You can also go to the scratch pad using this scratch pad key, which is over here on the left side of the calculator. You can use the scratch pad button to toggle between the calculator function and the graphing function. We're going to look at the calculator function. Again, you'll notice that the settings have been set to degree, which is what we want. And also you can access your settings through this gear, kind of by where the battery is. So if you click on the gear, then you can do that here. And you could go to your document settings if you needed to change something. Now we're going to look at actual functions on the calculator. So we're going to start with something just really simple. If I want to add 5 plus 8, I just simply type 5 plus 8 and hit enter. Okay, gives me 13. Let's try dividing. If I divide 3 divided by 9, hit enter. Notice that it defaulted to what looks more like a traditional fraction, and also it gave me a fraction answer. This is the exact answer, 1/3. If I wanted to get a decimal approximation, it would not be an exact answer, but it'd be an estimate, then what I can do is I can hit Control. When I hit Control, that's the blue key, then whatever button I push after that, it's actually going to do the function that's in blue above the key. So if I press x squared, it's going to give me a square root symbol. So notice above enter, there's a little, what looks like an equal sign, but it's not. It's the approximation symbol or the estimate. So if I hit Control Enter, then you'll notice that it took 3/9 and it estimated it to 0.33333. We of course know that that's a repeating decimal. Okay, so Control Enter is a way to get a decimal approximation. I will warn you to be careful and make sure after you do that that you look at what it took to approximate, because sometimes it does some funky things, and you want to make sure that it did what you wanted it to do. Always check that. Now, another way that we can enter a fraction is we can hit, as you can see above the division key, what looks like a fraction. So we're going to hit Control Divide, and it's going to give us this fraction template. So then I could do 5, and then I could arrow down and say 6. Okay, what if I wanted to do 5 6 plus 1/3? Okay, if I put a plus right here, notice it's in the denominator. So I want to delete that, and I want to make sure I arrow over outside the fraction. Okay, so I want to do now plus, and then I'm going to hit, this time actually I'm going to show you a different way. We're going to put 1 first, then we're going to do Control Divide, and it recognizes, okay, you wanted a fraction with 1 as the numerator. Now I can type my 3, arrow over, and hit Enter. Again, it gives it to us as a fraction, and if we wanted the approximation, we could press Control Enter, and there is the approximation. All right, let's look at order of operations and how to type things in the calculator and kind of thinking about what the calculator is going to do with that. So let's type in 5 minus 3, and we want to square the 3. So x squared means that it's going to square whatever you have already typed. So minus 3 squared divided by 8. Okay, let's just start with that. 5 minus 3 squared divided by 8. Now, we should know order of operations is parentheses, exponent, multiply, divide, add, subtract. Remember, multiply, divide is from left to right. But first we need to do the exponent, which would be 3 squared, which is 9. Then we would divide 9 by 8, and then we would subtract that from whatever 5 is. So let's see what the answer is here. Okay, so you can kind of see how the calculator set this up. I typed it in, and it didn't look like this. Okay, but this is what the calculator is reading it to be. So that would be our answer. Now let's specifically talk about exponents. So what happens when, let's say I want to do 5 to the 3rd power. I'm going to type 5, and then I'm going to use this button, which is called the caret, 5, and it's going to give me an exponent key, 5 to the 3rd power, and press Enter. It's 125. Okay, 5 to the 3rd means 5 times 5 times 5. Now let's see what negative 5 to the 3rd power is. It's negative 125. Okay, negative 125. Now, what about negative, let's do 5 squared is 25. Let's do negative 5 squared. It says it's negative 25. Okay, but if I square negative 5, that's negative 5 times negative 5. It should be a positive. So what's happening here is the calculator is reading that this is negative 1 times 5 squared. In other words, it's only squaring the 5. It's not squaring the whole thing as negative 5. So if you are trying to square a negative number, you have to use parentheses. So it would need to look like this. Notice I clicked the parenthesis key, and it defaulted to make this the second part of the parentheses. So I'm going to arrow over outside the parentheses. Now I'm going to hit squared, and that's how I get my positive 25. That is so very important. Please make sure you're paying attention to that. Now let's look at how you take the square root of something. I told you that the square root key was here. So we're going to hit Control X squared, which gives me the square root key. I can type in whatever I want, 36, and it gives me 6. Okay, what happens when it's not a perfect square, like 53? Okay, now it's giving me an approximation. Okay, it's giving me an approximation, 7.28011. Let's do the square root of 40. Okay, again, it gives me an approximation. You're going to learn eventually how to simplify radicals, giving an exact answer. Square root of 40 would be 2 square root of 10, but for now this will be acceptable. If you click on document, which we're not actually in a document, but we still have this menu, which, let me press escape and go back. The document menu can be accessed also through this drop down arrow. And so I've got lots of different options, and if I scroll down to the very bottom, I've got this clear scratch pad option. Okay, and this actually can be accessed just by pressing document and then the letter B. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, clear scratch pad. And now I just have a blank screen. You don't have to do that, but sometimes when I'm starting something new, I prefer to have a blank screen, and so that's nice to know how to do. Again, document B will clear your scratch pad so you can have a free working space. Your scratch pad will keep whatever is on it even when you turn off the calculator, and so sometimes when there's just so much in there, it's better to clear it out. Let's just take a quick look at the graphing portion of this. So I clicked on the scratch pad key over here, and now I'm toggled to the graphing section. As you can see here, I've got f1 of x, okay, so I can type in an equation to type in a function. All right, so we've got our entry line here, so I could type a function, and you can use this x as your variable, x plus 3, and I can type enter, and it's going to graph the line for me. As you'll notice, the entry line disappeared. So if you're wanting to either edit that, one thing you could do is you can use your mouse and you can double click, which actually might be slightly difficult to do with this mouse pad here. So another thing that you could do is you could just press the tab button here and it'll bring up the entry line. Notice it says F2. So that's saying that it's going to add a new function. If you wanted to edit the first one, you could just arrow up and you could edit that by using the delete keys as necessary. Please do not delete the equal sign because that's going to make it a relation and we really want it to stay a function. If ever we need to delete the equal sign, I will let you know, but just be careful not to do that because it changes the settings. And then you need to go back and you need to change it to a function, which we would prefer not to do. So I'm going to do x squared minus 5, press enter, so there's a different function. In order to access the table, all you got to do is hit Control T, and you can access the table here. Unfortunately, you can't access the table on the screen by itself without the graph, and so the graph gets really small and is hard to read, but if you do need the table, it's there for you, and you can scroll up and down as necessary. So to make the table go away, I just hit Control T again, and it brings me back to my regular graph. All right, so let's go home, and again, everything in the scratch pad is just naturally going to stay there in the scratch pad, but it's not going to save in a way that a document might save, but you should not need the document feature in your class this year, so don't worry about that. If you have other questions, you can definitely find resources online, especially if it's a specific question on how to do something, but I just want to remind you that you should always check your calculator and make sure that it is doing the operation that you want it to do. So just because you think you typed it incorrectly or you know what you want it to do, always double check the entry line and just make sure it looks like what you imagine it would look like.